This is the story of a man whose life changed forever in a matter of seconds after a stranger threw acid in his face. He remembers the pain as something beyond words, something no language can truly capture. The closest comparison he can give is the feeling of being set on fire, as if petrol had been poured over his body and someone had lit a match. Before that day, he lived a completely different life. He was a highly driven businessman, working relentlessly, often 70 to 80 hours a week. Work wasn't just a necessity for him, it was his identity. He thrived on ambition, on building, on pushing forward. He had a family too, a wife and a young son, Theo, who was only about 18 months old at the time. Despite his busy life, becoming a father meant everything to him. In fact, he would later believe that having a son at that moment in his life is one of the main reasons he survived what was about to happen. Then came the day that would divide his life into two parts, before and after. It was an ordinary afternoon. He was working from home, preparing for a trip to take his mother to the airport. Everything seemed normal, but then he noticed something unusual, a red van parked nearby. It looked similar to one used by his company, but something didn't feel quite right. He didn't think much of it until there was a knock at the door. Like anyone would, he opened it without hesitation, and in that instant, everything changed. A man stood there, threw a pint of sulfuric acid directly into his face, and said, "This is for you, mate," before running away. There was no warning, no explanation, just unimaginable violence. But in those critical seconds, something extraordinary happened. Because of his past experience working with chemicals, he immediately recognized what had just happened. He knew it was acid, and that realization likely saved his life. Without hesitation, he ran to the kitchen, tearing off his clothes as they began to disintegrate from the chemical reaction. He turned on the tap and started pouring water over himself continuously, desperately trying to wash the acid away. The pain was unbearable, yet somehow he stayed conscious long enough to call for help. Soon after, emergency services arrived. Even then, he remained aware. Though in extreme agony, he could taste the acid in his mouth. Everything burned, and then he lost consciousness. The next thing he remembers is waking up 6 days later in an intensive care unit. During those 6 days, his condition had been critical. Doctors weren't sure he would survive. His family had even been warned to prepare for the worst. At one point, the situation became so severe that the fumes from the acid triggered fire alarms in the hospital, forcing an evacuation of the emergency department. But among the chaos, one man made a life-changing difference. An ophthalmologist stayed by his side throughout the first night, continuously flushing his eyes with saline solution to prevent permanent blindness. Without that dedication, he would have lost his vision completely. When he finally woke up, something unexpected stood out. He wasn't overwhelmed by fear or despair. Instead, he showed signs of resilience. Unable to speak, he asked for a pen and paper. The first thing he wrote wasn't about himself. It was a simple question: "How's Dad?" Even in that moment, he was thinking about others. Physically, however, the damage was devastating. His face had suffered severe chemical burns. His body, including his arms and torso, was also affected. Over time, he would undergo countless surgeries, including painful skin grafts taken from his own body. His eyesight was partially saved, but not entirely. He eventually lost vision in one eye and required special lenses to see with the other. One of the most difficult aspects of his recovery wasn't just the pain, but the transformation of his appearance. Burn injuries don't just heal, they change the structure of the skin. As scar tissue forms, it contracts, pulling features out of place. At one point, he even lost his eyelids multiple times, making it impossible to properly close his eyes or protect them from light and air. Despite all this, the emotional challenges were just as intense. 4 months, he didn't see his young son, and one of his biggest fears was whether his child would recognize him again. When they were finally reunited, the moment was heartbreaking. At first, his son was scared. He didn't recognize the face in front of him, but then he heard his father's voice, and everything changed. The child reached out and hugged him tightly, refusing to let go. That moment gave him strength. It reminded him that beyond the injuries, beyond the trauma, he was still the same person. Meanwhile, the investigation into the attack was unfolding. The police quickly identified a suspect using the information he had given before losing consciousness. The attacker had traveled hundreds of miles to carry out the assault. But the most shocking part, there was no clear reason. Authorities eventually concluded that it may have been a case of mistaken identity. Despite the severity of the crime, the legal outcome left him frustrated. The attacker was sentenced, but the punishment was later reduced, serving only a few years in prison. For him, it felt like justice had fallen short. Instead of letting anger consume him, he made a different choice. He chose to speak out. Over the years, he became an advocate for acid attack survivors, raising awareness and pushing for stronger laws. He wanted the world to understand the reality of these attacks, the lifelong consequences that go far beyond the initial moment. Because survival is just the beginning, recovery is a journey that never truly ends. Today, his life is very different from what it once was. He no longer chases the same ambitions, the long working hours, the endless pursuit of success. Those things no longer define him. Instead, he values time, especially time with his children. Ironically, he believes that one of the only positive things to come from the attack is the relationship he now has with his family. He is more present, more connected, more aware of what truly matters. His life didn't end that day, it changed, and through unimaginable pain, loss, and struggle he rebuilt it into something new. A life marked not just by tragedy but by resilience, purpose, and strength. What do you think about the story of this man, whose life was turned completely upside down? Share your thoughts in the comments.